I still remember the weight of my navy blue dress as I smoothed it down one last time before stepping out of my Honda Civic that September morning. The fabric was expensive, more than I usually spent on myself, but I wanted to look perfect for Christopher's wedding. My son was marrying Rachel Moore at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in Center City, Philadelphia, one of those grand old buildings with towering spires and stained glass windows that made you feel small just walking up to them. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and that crisp promise of winter that always reminded me of new beginnings. I'd been looking forward to this day for months, ever since Christopher called me with the news. "Mom, Rachel said yes," he'd shouted into the phone, and I could hear the joy in his voice. That was 8 months ago, when things between us were still normal. I adjusted the pearl necklace around my throat, the same one I'd worn to my own wedding 32 years earlier, before everything fell apart with Christopher's father. My hands were shaking slightly, but I told myself it was just excitement. After all, this was my only child's wedding day. The child I'd raised alone after David walked out when Christopher was 12. The boy I'd worked double shifts at the hospital to put through college. The young man I'd sacrificed everything for. Walking up those stone steps to the church, I could see other guests arriving. Women in elegant dresses and men in pressed suits, all of them looking like they belonged in this world of old money and social connections that Rachel came from. The Moore family had roots in Philadelphia that went back generations. They owned a successful law firm, lived in a mansion in Chestnut Hill, and moved in circles I'd only seen in magazines. I'd met them exactly 3 times in the 2 years Christopher and Rachel had been together. 3 awkward dinners where I felt like an outsider looking in. Rachel's mother, Patricia Moore, had a way of asking questions that sounded polite, but felt like tiny knife cuts. "Oh, Linda works in healthcare," she'd say to her friends, making my 25 years as a registered nurse sound like I emptied bedpans for a living. How noble! But today was supposed to be different. Today, I wasn't Linda Harrington, the divorced nurse from a working-class neighborhood in South Philly. Today, I was the mother of the groom. Today, I belonged. The church interior took my breath away. Massive wooden beams stretched overhead, and morning light filtered through windows, depicting biblical scenes in jewel tones. White roses and baby's breath decorated every pew end, and the altar was adorned with cascading arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I stood in the back for a moment, taking it all in. The sanctuary was filling up quickly, and I could see the Moore family taking their places in the front rows on the bride's side. Patricia Moore wore a champagne-colored silk suit that probably cost more than my car, and she was directing various relatives to their seats like a conductor orchestrating a symphony. That's when I spotted Christopher near the altar, looking handsome in his black tuxedo. My heart swelled with pride. Even from a distance, I could see he'd gotten his hair cut perfectly, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He was talking to his best man, Michael Chen, his college roommate who'd become like a brother to him over the years. I started walking down the side aisle toward the front, my heels clicking softly against the polished stone floor. This was it, the moment I'd been dreaming of since the day Christopher was born. I was going to sit in the front row and watch my son get married, maybe cry a little when they exchanged vows, and later dance with him at the reception while everyone watched and smiled. But as I approached the first pew on the groom's side, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The entire front row was empty except for 2 small reserved signs, not the usual family in signs you see at weddings, but elegant cream cards with gold lettering that read Mr. and Mrs. Moore on one side and Mr. and Mrs. Henderson on the other. Henderson. That was Rachel's aunt and uncle, the ones who'd practically raised her after her parents divorced when she was young, the ones Christopher had told me about, the ones who were like parents to Rachel. I stood there for a moment, confused. Where was my reserved seat? Where was the sign that said Mrs. Harrington, or even just mother of the groom? I looked around, thinking maybe I'd missed something. Maybe there was another section designated for immediate family. That's when Christopher noticed me. Our eyes met across the church, and instead of the warm smile I expected, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Panic. He quickly excused himself from Michael and started walking toward me, his face tight with an expression I'd never seen before. "Mom," he said when he reached me, keeping his voice low. "What are you doing here so early?" "I wanted to get a good seat," I said, gesturing toward the front row. "I thought maybe you'd saved me a spot up front with the rest of the family." The word family seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He glanced nervously toward the Moore section, where Patricia was now arranging flowers in a crystal vase someone had brought as a last-minute addition to the altar decorations. "Listen, Mom," Christopher said, and his voice had taken on that careful, measured tone he used when he was trying to manage a difficult situation. "I need to talk to you about the seating arrangements." Something cold and heavy settled in my chest. "What about them?" He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up slightly. "The thing is, Rachel's family, they have a lot of traditions, old Philadelphia traditions, and they've been very specific about how they want the ceremony to go." "Christopher, what are you trying to tell me?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "The front rows are reserved for the primary family members, the ones who are, officially part of the wedding party and the immediate family circle." "I am immediate family," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm your mother." "I know, Mom, I know. But you have to understand." "Understand what?" That's when Rachel appeared at his side, materializing like she'd been listening from the shadows. She was already in her wedding dress, a stunning creation of ivory silk and French lace that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Her blonde hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and her makeup was flawless. She looked like she'd stepped out of a bridal magazine. "Hello, Mrs. Harrington," she said with that polite smile she always wore around me, the smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Rachel. You look beautiful." I meant it, despite everything. She really did look like a princess. "Rachel was just explaining to me about the seating," Christopher said quickly. "Her family has some specific traditions. It's really nothing personal." Rachel interrupted, her voice smooth as honey. "It's just that in our family, the front rows are reserved for blood relatives and godparents, people who've been part of our lives since childhood. You know, it's just how we've always done things." I felt like I'd been slapped. "I've been part of Christopher's life since before he was born." "Of course you have," Rachel said, that smile never wavering. "And we're so grateful for everything you've done for him. That's why we've reserved a lovely seat for you in the 3rd row. You'll have a perfect view of everything. 3rd row, not 2nd row, where at least I'd be close. 3rd row, where I'd be sitting with distant cousins and college friends." "Rachel," I started, but Christopher cut me off. "Mom, please don't make this difficult. It's Rachel's day, and her family is paying for most of the wedding. We need to respect their wishes." The words hit me like a physical blow. Her family was paying. Of course they were. What could a divorced nurse from South Philly contribute to a wedding at one of Philadelphia's most prestigious churches, followed by a reception at the Union League? "I offered to help pay," I said quietly. "You told me not to worry about it." "And we meant that," Rachel said. "We never expected you to contribute financially. We know we know your situation. My situation." The careful way she said it made it clear exactly what she thought my situation was. Poor, working class, not good enough for her precious family traditions. I looked at my son, this young man I'd raised alone, this person I'd sacrificed everything for, and I searched his face for some sign of the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to make me Mother's Day cards out of construction paper and glue. "Christopher," I said, "are you really going to let her do this to me?" For a moment, just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But then he glanced at Rachel, and his face hardened again. "Mom, you're being dramatic. It's just a seating arrangement. It doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," I whispered. Rachel's smile widened slightly, and I realized she was enjoying this. This public humiliation of the working-class mother who didn't fit into her perfect Philadelphia society wedding. This was her way of making sure I knew exactly where I stood in their new life together. "Mrs. Biddicky, Harrington," she said sweetly, "I think you'll find the 3rd row is actually quite nice. Mrs. Patterson, She's Christopher's third-grade teacher. We'll be sitting right next to you. I'm sure you'll have lots to talk about. Third-grade teacher. She was seating me with his elementary school teacher, like I was just another person from his past, rather than the woman who'd given birth to him and raised him single-handedly. I looked around the church, suddenly seeing it through different eyes. This wasn't a celebration I was invited to. It was a performance I was being allowed to watch from the cheap seats. All those months of planning, all the conversations about flowers and music and menus that I'd been carefully excluded from, all the shower and bachelor party invitations that had somehow never made it to my mailbox. "You know what?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I think I need some air." "Mom," Christopher started, but I was already turning away. "I'll be right back," I said. "I just need a moment." But as I walked back down that long aisle, past all those elegantly dressed strangers who belonged in this world, in a way I never would, I knew I was lying. I needed more than a moment. I needed to figure out how I'd raised a son who could stand there and watch his fiancée humiliate his own mother without saying a word in my defense. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped back into the September morning, where the air suddenly seemed easier to breathe, and the weight of my navy blue dress didn't feel quite so heavy. Behind me, I could hear the organ music starting up, the gentle melody that would soon become the processional march. In a few minutes, Rachel would walk down that aisle in her perfect dress to marry my son, and I would be, where would I be? Standing on those stone steps, looking out at the Philadelphia skyline, I realized I had a choice to make. I could go back inside, take my seat in the third row, like a good, grateful mother who knew her place, or I could do something else entirely, something that would change everything. I stood on those church steps for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes. The organ music had grown louder, more triumphant, and I knew the wedding party was lining up inside. Soon Rachel would make her grand entrance down that aisle, and everyone would stand and turn to watch her float toward my son like some kind of fairy tale princess. Everyone except me. My hands were trembling as I reached into my purse for my phone. I needed to call someone, to hear a friendly voice, to remind myself that I wasn't completely alone in the world. But as I scrolled through my contacts, I realized how small my circle had become. Most of my friends were work colleagues, and they were either working the Saturday shift at the hospital or dealing with their own family obligations. My sister Margaret lived in Seattle now, 3 time zones away, and we barely talked except for birthdays and holidays. When had my life become so narrow? When had everything started revolving around Christopher? The answer came to me as I watched a young couple hurry past me toward the church entrance, the woman lifting her dress slightly to navigate the steps in her high heels. It had happened gradually, over the years since his father left. Every decision I made, every sacrifice, every choice had been about giving Christopher the best life possible. I'd turned down dates because I didn't want to confuse him. I'd worked extra shifts instead of going back to school because I wanted to make sure he had everything he needed for college. I'd moved to a smaller apartment so I could afford to help with his expenses when he was starting out in his career as a marketing analyst. And now, standing here in my expensive dress that I'd bought specifically to fit in with his new life, I realized that somewhere along the way, I had lost myself completely. The church bells began to chime. 11 o'clock, the ceremony was starting. I could hear the organ music change to Pachelbel's canon, and my heart clenched. We talked about that piece once, Christopher and I, years ago when he was in high school and struggling with a particularly difficult piece for his piano recital. "It's so repetitive, Mom," he'd complained. The same pattern over and over. But I'd explained to him how beautiful repetition could be, how the variations built on each other to create something magnificent. Now, listening to those familiar notes drift through the church doors, I wondered if he even remembered that conversation. A car pulled up to the curb, a sleek black BMW with tinted windows. The driver got out and opened the passenger door, and out stepped a woman I recognized from the rehearsal dinner 2 nights ago. Rachel's cousin from New York, dressed in a burgundy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She was late, rushing toward the church with quick, clicking steps, but she paused when she saw me standing there. "Oh, hello," she said, slightly out of breath. "You're Christopher's mother, aren't you, Linda?" "Yes," I managed. "I'm Jennifer Morrison, Rachel's cousin. We met at the dinner Thursday night." She glanced toward the church doors, where the music was swelling. "Aren't you going in? They're starting." "I was just getting some air." She looked at me more closely, and I saw her take in my carefully applied makeup, my styled hair, my expensive dress. "Are you feeling all right? You look a bit pale." For a moment, I considered telling her the truth about the seating arrangement, about being relegated to the third row, about my son's refusal to stand up for me. But what would be the point? She was Rachel's family. She probably thought I belonged exactly where they'd put me. "I'm fine," I said. "Just pre-ceremony nerves." "Oh, I understand completely. I cried at my daughter's wedding before it even started." She smiled warmly, and for a second, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe not everyone in Rachel's family saw me as an outsider. "We should probably get inside. Though, Rachel will kill me if I'm late for the processional." She started toward the doors, then paused and looked back at me. "Are you coming?" This was it. This was my moment of choice. I could follow Jennifer Morrison into that church, walk down the aisle to my assigned seat in the third row, and watch my son marry the woman who just made it crystal clear that I was not welcome in their inner circle. I could sit there with his third-grade teacher and smile and pretend that everything was fine, that my heart wasn't breaking, that I hadn't just been publicly humiliated by the two people I loved most in the world. Or I could choose something else entirely. "Actually," I heard myself say, "I think I'm going to take a little walk first. Clear my head." Jennifer looked confused. "But the ceremony is starting." "I know." She stared at me for a moment longer, then shrugged. "Well, okay. I'll see you inside, I suppose." She disappeared through the church doors, leaving me alone on the steps again. The organ music was reaching its crescendo now. This was the moment when Rachel would begin her walk down the aisle. In my imagination, I could see her perfectly, radiant and glowing, her hand on her father's arm, her eyes locked on Christopher as she moved toward her future. Our future, their future, a future that clearly didn't have room for me in the front row. I started walking down the street, away from the church. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to move, to put distance between myself and the sound of that organ, between myself and the reality of what was happening inside those walls. Philadelphia in September is beautiful, all golden light and changing leaves, and Center City was busy with Saturday morning activity, couples walking hand in hand, families heading to brunch, tourists taking pictures of the historic buildings. Normal people living normal lives, not standing outside their children's weddings wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I found myself walking toward Rittenhouse Square, one of those perfect little urban parks that make Philadelphia feel like a small town sometimes. There were empty benches scattered throughout the park, and I chose one under a maple tree that was just beginning to turn red and gold. My phone buzzed, a text message. It was from Michael Chen, Christopher's best man. "Hey, Mrs. H, where are you? Christopher is asking." I stared at the message for a long time. Christopher was asking, not worried, not concerned, just asking. Probably because someone had noticed the empty seat in the third row and mentioned it to him. I typed back, "Tell him I needed some air. I'll be along shortly." But even as I sent the message, I knew I was lying again. Another buzz. This time it was a photo message from my coworker Sarah at the hospital. She'd taken a picture of the wedding announcement in today's Philadelphia Inquirer, a formal engagement photo of Christopher and Rachel, both of them smiling perfect society smiles. The headline read, "Moore Harrington Wedding at St. Matthew's Episcopal." Moore Harrington. Even in the newspaper, her name came first. I called Sarah. "Linda," she answered on the first ring. "How's the big day going?" "I saw the announcement in the paper this morning. They look so happy. I started, then stopped. How could I even begin to explain? "Linda, are you there?" "I'm here," I said quietly. "You sound strange. Is everything okay?" Sarah had been my friend for 15 years. She'd been there through Christopher's teenage years, through the difficult times when money was tight, through the proud moments when he graduated college and got his first job. She knew how much this day meant to me. "Sarah," I said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. If your son got married and his fiancée told you that you couldn't sit in the front row because you weren't primary family, what would you do?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Linda," Sarah said slowly, "please tell me that didn't actually happen." "It happened." "Where are you right now?" "Sitting on a bench in Rittenhouse Square." "You left the wedding?" "I haven't decided yet." Another silence. "Linda, honey, listen to me. You are that boy's mother. You are the most primary family he has. You raised him by yourself. You sacrificed everything for him. And if he's letting some spoiled princess treat you like you don't matter, then he needs a reality check. But it's his wedding day, Sarah. I can't make a scene." "Who's making a scene? You're not screaming or throwing things. You're just not accepting being treated like garbage." My phone buzzed with another text. This one was from Christopher himself. "Mom, where are you? People are asking. Can you please just come back? People are asking. Not, I'm worried about you, or I need my mom here on the most important day of my life. Just people are asking. I have to go." I told Sarah, "Linda, whatever you decide to do, just remember that you deserve better than this. You spent 26 years putting that boy first, and if he can't stand up for you on his wedding day, then maybe it's time you started putting yourself first for once." I hung up and stared at Christopher's text message. Then very slowly I started typing a response. "Christopher, I love you more than you will ever know, but I cannot and will not sit in the third row of your wedding like I'm some distant relative you barely know. I am your mother. I am the person who held you when you had nightmares, who taught you to ride a bike, who worked double shifts to pay for your college. If Rachel and her family cannot respect that, and if you won't stand up for me, then I think it's best if I'm not there today. I hope you have a beautiful wedding. Love, Mom." I read it 3 times before hitting send. My hands were shaking as I put the phone away. What had I just done? I just told my son I wasn't coming to his wedding. I'd just chosen my dignity over being there for the most important day of his life. But as I sat there in the autumn sunlight, listening to the sounds of the city around me, I realized something. For the first time in 26 years, I'd chosen myself. The phone rang. "Christopher." I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Voicemail again. A text. "Mom, you're being ridiculous. Just come back. We can figure this out." Another text. "Please don't do this to me today." And then, the one that broke my heart. "Fine, if that's how you want to be." I turned off my phone. The wedding was probably in full swing now. Rachel had walked down the aisle in her perfect dress to marry my son, and I wasn't there to see it. For 26 years, I'd imagined this moment, watching Christopher say his vows, maybe crying a little, feeling proud and sad and happy all at once. Instead, I was sitting on a park bench, having chosen my self-respect over my son's wedding day. A young mother walked by, pushing a stroller with a toddler inside. The little boy was pointing at the ducks in the pond, laughing at something only he could understand. The woman looked tired but content, like she knew exactly who she was and where she belonged in the world. I used to be that woman, I realized. I used to know exactly who I was, Christopher's mom. Everything I did, every decision I made, was filtered through that identity. But somewhere along the way, that had stopped being enough. Somewhere along the way, I'd started needing to be more than just someone's mother. Maybe today was the day I finally started figuring out who Linda Harrington really was, when she wasn't defined by someone else. My stomach growled, reminding me that I'd been too nervous to eat breakfast. The reception would be starting soon at the Union League, with its 5-course meal and open bar and dance floor, where Christopher and Rachel would have their first dance as husband and wife. But I wasn't going to be there for that either. Instead, I stood up from my bench, smoothed down my expensive navy dress, and started walking toward the little cafe on the corner of the square. I was going to buy myself lunch. I was going to sit by myself and eat a meal that I chose, at a pace that suited me, without worrying about what anyone else needed or wanted. It was such a small thing, really. But as I walked toward that cafe, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Free. The cafe was one of those charming little places that Philadelphia does so well. Exposed brick walls, mismatched vintage furniture, and the smell of fresh coffee beans mixing with something savory from the kitchen. I chose a table by the window where I could watch people walking through the square, all of them going about their Saturday lives without any idea that someone's world had just shifted completely. The waitress was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with purple streaks in her dark hair and multiple ear piercings. She looked at me with curious eyes as I settled into my chair, probably wondering why a woman dressed for a formal event was sitting alone in a casual cafe at noon on a Saturday. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked. "Coffee, please." And I paused, realizing I had no idea what I wanted to eat. When was the last time I'd ordered a meal based purely on what sounded good to me, rather than what was practical or affordable or quick? "What do you recommend?" She brightened. "The mushroom and Gruyere omelette is amazing, and our sourdough toast is made fresh this morning." "That sounds perfect." As she walked away, I pulled out my phone and turned it back on. Immediately, it started buzzing with notifications. Missed calls from Christopher, text messages from Michael, even one from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be from Rachel herself. Rachel's message was short and cutting. "Your behavior today is selfish and embarrassing. Christopher deserves better on his wedding day." I stared at that message for a long time. Selfish. She was calling me selfish for refusing to accept being humiliated. She was calling me embarrassing for having the audacity to want to be treated like Christopher's mother, instead of like some distant acquaintance. The coffee arrived, hot and strong, and I wrapped my hands around the mug for warmth. Outside, the September day was beautiful, but I felt cold from the inside out. My phone rang. Sarah again. "I've been thinking about you all morning," she said when I answered. "How are you holding up?" "I left," I said simply. "Good for you. Is it though?" "Sarah, I just missed my only child's wedding." "What kind of mother does that?" "The kind who has some self-respect. Linda, I've been watching you for years, and you've been disappearing a little bit more every time Christopher brings that girl around. Do you remember what you were like before she came into the picture?" I thought about it. Not really. "You used to laugh more. You used to talk about taking that photography class at the community college, remember? You wanted to travel, maybe take a cruise to Alaska. You had plans, dreams that didn't revolve around Christopher." She was right. I had forgotten about those things, about the person I used to be, before I became completely consumed with being the perfect mother to make up for not being able to give Christopher the perfect family. "You know what the saddest part is?" Sarah continued. "I don't think Christopher even realizes what he's lost. He's so caught up in this new life with Rachel and her family that he can't see what he's throwing away." The omelette arrived, fluffy and golden, smelling like comfort and indulgence. I took a bite and realized it was delicious. Probably the best omelette I'd had in years. When was the last time I'd eaten something just because it tasted good? "Sarah," I said, "can I ask you something else? Anything. Do you think I'm a failure as a mother?" The silence stretched for so long that I thought we'd been disconnected. "Linda Harrington," Sarah finally said, her voice fierce. "You are one of the best mothers I've ever known. You raised a successful, educated, well-adjusted man completely on your own. You sacrificed everything to give him opportunities you never had. The fact that he's too blind to appreciate that right now doesn't make you a failure. It makes him ungrateful. But no buts. You know what I think? I think you've been such a good mother that you forgot how to be anything else. And maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe Christopher needs to learn that you're a whole person, not just his mom." After we hung up, I sat there picking at my omelet and thinking about what she'd said. Was she right? Had I been so focused on being the perfect mother that I'd lost track of being Linda? My phone buzzed again. Another text from Christopher. "Mom, people are asking where you are. I had to tell them you weren't feeling well. Can you please just come to the reception? Rachel's parents are starting to ask questions." Rachel's parents. Not, "I miss you," or "I need you here." Just concern about what the Moore family would think. I typed back. "I'm not coming to the reception, Christopher. I meant what I said." The response came quickly. "You're ruining my wedding day." I stared at that message until the words blurred. I was ruining his wedding day, not the bride who'd deliberately excluded me, not the groom who'd refused to defend his mother, me. I was the one ruining everything by refusing to accept being treated like garbage. I turned off my phone again and focused on my meal. The cafe had filled up while I was eating, mostly with young couples and families enjoying their Saturday afternoon. At the table next to me, a woman about my age was having lunch with what looked like her daughter and granddaughter. They were laughing about something, all 3 generations sharing some private joke, and I felt a sharp pang of longing. Would I ever have that with Christopher? Would there ever be grandchildren who knew me as more than just the grandmother who lived in the small apartment and worked at the hospital? Would there be family dinners where I belonged, where I wasn't walking on eggshells trying not to offend Rachel's sensibilities? "Excuse me," said a voice beside me. I looked up to see an elderly gentleman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "I don't mean to intrude, but you look like you might need a friend." "I'm sorry. You've been sitting here for an hour, and I've watched you go through what looks like every emotion in the book. I'm a retired counselor. Old habits die hard, I suppose. My name is Frank Sullivan." He had the kind of face that invited trust, lined with age but warm with genuine kindness. Under normal circumstances, I would have politely declined any conversation with a stranger. But these weren't normal circumstances. "Linda Harrington," I said. "And you're right. I could probably use a friend right about now. Would you mind if I joined you? I promise I'm not a crazy person. Just someone who's learned to recognize when another person is going through a difficult time." I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Please." Frank settled into the chair and signaled the waitress for coffee. "And so, Linda Harrington, what's brought you to this lovely cafe on what appears to be a day when you should be somewhere else?" I looked down at my dress, realizing how obvious it must be that I was dressed for a formal event. "My son got married today." "Congratulations. That's wonderful news." "Is it?" Frank studied my face carefully. "You don't look like a woman celebrating her son's wedding." And then, to my complete surprise, I started talking. I told this complete stranger everything, about the seating arrangement, about Rachel's smile, about Christopher's refusal to defend me, about the text messages and the choice I'd made to leave. I told him about the 26 years of sacrifice, about working double shifts and giving up my own dreams, about watching my son become someone I barely recognize. Frank listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making a small sound of understanding. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Linda," he said finally, "how long has it been since you did something just for yourself?" "What do you mean?" "I mean something that had nothing to do with Christopher, or his needs, or his happiness. Something that was purely about what you wanted." I thought about it. "I honestly can't remember. And that," Frank said gently, "is exactly the problem." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "I run a support group at the community center downtown. It's for people who've lost their sense of identity, parents whose children have grown up, spouses whose marriages have ended, people who've retired and don't know who they are anymore. We meet Thursday evenings." I took the card. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that." "You don't have to be ready. You just have to be willing to consider the possibility that Linda Harrington is more than just Christopher's mother. And from what you've told me, I think she might be pretty amazing if you gave her a chance to emerge." Frank finished his coffee and stood up. "I hope I see you Thursday, Linda, and I hope that whatever happens with your son, you remember that you're worth more than how anyone else treats you, even him." After he left, I sat there for another hour, nursing my coffee and thinking about what he'd said. Around me, the cafe continued its cheerful Saturday afternoon bustle, but I felt like I was in a bubble, separate from all of it, trying to figure out who I was going to be when I walked out those doors. My phone buzzed one more time. A voicemail from Christopher. Against my better judgment, I listened to it. "Mom." His voice sounded tired and frustrated. "I don't understand why you're doing this. Rachel is crying, her parents are asking questions, and everyone keeps looking around like they're waiting for you to show up. I know you're upset about the seating thing, but it's not that big a deal. Can you please just come back? We can talk about this later, after the honeymoon. But right now, I need you to be the mom I know you are and just be here for me. Be the mom I know you are. The mom who always put his needs first. The mom who never complained, never asked for anything, never expected to be treated with respect or consideration. The mom who was grateful for whatever scraps of attention and affection he threw her way. But what if I didn't want to be that mom anymore? I paid my check, left a generous tip for the purple-haired waitress, and walked back out into the Philadelphia afternoon. The wedding would be over by now. Christopher and Rachel would be husband and wife, probably taking photos in the church garden while their guests made their way to the Union League for cocktails and dinner. Instead of heading back toward the church or the reception venue, I found myself walking in the opposite direction, toward the train station. I had no particular destination in mind, but I knew I couldn't go home yet. Home was too full of Christopher, his baby pictures on the mantle, his high school trophies on the bookshelf, his graduation photo on the refrigerator. Home was the apartment I'd chosen based on the school district, kept neat and welcoming in case he ever wanted to visit, filled with memories of the life I'd built around being his mother. But maybe it was time to figure out what home could look like when it was just mine. At 30th Street Station, I bought a ticket on the next train going north, toward New York, toward somewhere that wasn't Philadelphia, toward a few hours where I could be anonymous and think about what came next. As the train pulled away from the city, I watched the familiar skyline disappear and tried to imagine what my life might look like now. For the first time in 26 years, I had no idea what came next. And surprisingly, that didn't terrify me as much as I thought it would. It felt like freedom. The train to New York was surprisingly peaceful. I'd chosen a window seat and spent the first hour watching the Pennsylvania countryside roll by, small towns, farmland, and forests just beginning to show their autumn colors. For the first time all day, I felt like I could breathe properly. The conductor, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes, had noticed my formal attire when she checked my ticket. Special occasion, she'd asked with a friendly smile. You could say that, I'd replied, and she'd nodded as if she understood that sometimes the less said, it, the better. Now, as we approached New York City, I realized I had no plan whatsoever. I'd bought a round-trip ticket on impulse, with the return train leaving at 8 o'clock that evening. That gave me about 4 hours in a city I'd visited maybe 3 times in my entire life, all of them with Christopher when he was younger. My phone had been mercifully quiet for the past hour, though I'd kept it turned off for most of the journey. As we pulled into Penn Station, I finally turned it back on to find 6 missed calls and a dozen text messages. Most were from Christopher, but there were also messages from Michael, from Sarah, and even one from my supervisor at the hospital, asking if I was all right because someone had called looking for me. Someone had called the hospital looking for me. On a Saturday, during Christopher's wedding reception, I scrolled through Christopher's messages, watching his tone evolve from frustrated to angry to something that looked almost like panic. Mom, where are you? People are really starting to ask questions now. This is so embarrassing. Rachel's grandmother is asking why my mother isn't here. I can't believe you're doing this to me. Fine. Don't come, but don't expect me to forget this. And then, the most recent one, sent just 20 minutes ago. Michael says someone saw you at 30th Street Station. Did you leave the city? Mom, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? As if my refusal to accept being humiliated was a character flaw. As if my decision to choose dignity over compliance was some kind of mental breakdown. I turned the phone off again and stepped onto the platform at Penn Station. New York City hit me like a wall of sound and energy. Thousands of people rushing in every direction. Announcements echoing overhead. The smell of hot dogs and coffee and subway tunnels all mixing together. For a moment, I felt overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of it all. But then something strange happened. In all that chaos, in all that anonymous crowd of strangers, I felt invisible in the best possible way. No one knew I was supposed to be at my son's wedding reception. No one knew I was Linda Harrington, the divorced nurse from South Philadelphia who'd just walked away from the most important day of her child's life. I was just another middle-aged woman in a navy dress, free to go wherever I wanted, to be whoever I wanted to be. I emerged from the station onto the street and was immediately swallowed up by the Saturday afternoon energy of Manhattan. Street vendors calling out their wares, taxis honking, people of every age and background hurrying past with their own mysterious missions and destinations. I started walking with no particular direction in mind, just following the flow of foot traffic and letting the city carry me along. After about 15 minutes, I found myself in what I later learned was the garment district, standing in front of a small art supply store with paintings displayed in the window. Photography, that's what Sarah had mentioned. How I used to talk about taking a photography class. I'd forgotten about that dream, about how I used to love taking pictures when Christopher was little. I'd had an old film camera, nothing fancy, but I'd loved capturing moments. Christopher's first steps, his kindergarten graduation, quiet moments in our little apartment when the light was just right. What had happened to that camera? Probably packed away in a closet somewhere, abandoned like so many other parts of myself that I'd set aside to focus on being the perfect mother. "Excuse me," I said to a young man walking past. "Is there a camera store around here anywhere?" He pointed down the street. B&H is about 6 blocks that way. Huge photography place. You can't miss it. I walked the 6 blocks slowly, taking in the energy of the city, the diversity of people, the sense that anything was possible here. When I reached B&H Photo, I stood outside for a moment, intimidated by the size of the place and the obvious expertise of the customers going in and out with professional-looking equipment. But then I thought about Frank Sullivan's question. When was the last time you did something just for yourself? The store was overwhelming. Aisles upon aisles of cameras and lenses and equipment I didn't understand. I wandered around for a while, feeling completely out of my depth, until a young woman with short pink hair and multiple tattoos approached me. "Can I help you find something?" she asked with a genuine smile. I used to take pictures. Years ago. Film camera. But I stopped, and now I'm thinking maybe I'd like to start again. But I don't know anything about digital cameras. How long has it been? About 15 years, I guess. Her eyes lit up. "Oh, you're going to love what's available now. The technology has come so far. What kind of photography were you interested in? Portraits, landscapes, street photography? I'm not really sure. I used to love capturing moments. Real life, you know? Not post stuff. Just life as it happens." "Perfect. Let me show you something." She led me to a display of cameras and picked up a sleek black model that fit perfectly in my hands. It was smaller and lighter than I'd expected. Nothing like the bulky professional cameras I'd seen other customers carrying. "This is perfect for what you're describing," she said. "Easy to use, but with enough manual controls that you can grow into it. Great for street photography, portraits, everyday life, and the image quality is incredible." She showed me how to hold it, explained the basic functions, let me take a few test shots around the store. It felt natural in my hands, like riding a bicycle after years away from it. "How much?" I asked, though I was almost afraid to hear the answer. She told me the price, and I winced. It was more than I'd spent on anything for myself ever. More than my monthly grocery budget. More than I should spend on a whim while sitting in a camera store in New York City after walking out of my son's wedding. But then I thought about that expression on Rachel's face when she'd told me I belonged in the 3rd row. I thought about Christopher's complete failure to defend me. I thought about 26 years of putting everyone else's needs and wants ahead of my own. "I'll take it," I said. The pink-haired saleswoman smiled. "Excellent choice. You're going to love rediscovering photography." As I walked out of the store with my new camera and a small bag of accessories, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, excitement about the future. Not anxiety about Christopher's needs or guilt about spending money on myself, just pure anticipation about what I might discover through this lens. I spent the next 2 hours walking through the city, experimenting with my new camera. I photographed street musicians and food vendors, interesting architecture and people hurrying past. I wasn't particularly good at it yet. The digital controls were different from what I remembered, but I didn't care. I was creating something, capturing moments that spoke to me, seeing the world through my own eyes instead of constantly filtering everything through Christopher's needs and opinions. Around 6 o'clock, my feet started to ache in my formal shoes, and I found a small cafe in Greenwich Village where I could rest and get something to eat. As I sat there reviewing the photos I'd taken on the camera's small screen, My phone buzzed with another call. Sarah. Linda, thank God. I've been worried sick. Christopher called the hospital looking for you. He called the hospital. He was convinced something terrible had happened to you. I told him I'd spoken to you this afternoon and you were fine. Just taking some time to think. What did he say to that? He was pretty angry. He said you'd embarrassed him in front of Rachel's family, that you'd made a scene by disappearing. I looked around the cafe, at the other customers enjoying their Saturday evening, at the photos on my camera screen, at the bustling life of the city outside the window. I didn't make a scene, Sarah. I just left, quietly. No drama, no confrontation. I just chose not to accept being treated like I don't matter. I know, honey, and I'm proud of you for that. But Christopher, he sounded genuinely upset, maybe even scared. Scared of what? I think scared that he might have really lost to you this time. I thought about that as I ordered dinner, a simple pasta dish that I chose purely because it sounded good, not because it was practical or affordable or quick. Had he lost me? Or had I finally found myself? My phone rang. Christopher. I let it go to voicemail, then immediately played the message. Mom. His voice was different now, less angry, more uncertain. I don't know where you are, but I need you to call me back. Please. People are asking questions, and I don't know what to tell them. Rachel's parents think something happened to you, and her grandmother keeps asking about my family, and I just need to know you're okay. We can figure this out, but I need you to call me back. I could hear music and laughter in the background. The reception was still going on, but there was something in his voice that I hadn't heard in a long time. Vulnerability. The same uncertainty I used to hear when he was a little boy and had a nightmare, when he needed me to tell him everything was going to be all right. For a moment, I considered calling him back. I could imagine the conversation. He would ask me to come home, promise that we'd work things out, assure me that the seating arrangement hadn't meant anything, and maybe I'd believe him, or at least want to believe him badly enough to pretend it was true. But then I looked at my camera sitting on the table next to my plate, at the photos I'd taken of strangers living their lives, of moments that had nothing to do with being anyone's mother or trying to fit into anyone else's expectations. For the first time in decades, I'd spent an entire afternoon being purely myself. I wasn't ready to give that up. Not yet. Instead of calling Christopher, I texted him, I'm safe. I'm in New York for the day, thinking things through. Enjoy your reception. We'll talk when I'm ready. I turned off the phone and focused on my dinner, on the conversations flowing around me in multiple languages, on the feeling of being completely anonymous in a city of millions. Through the cafe window, I could see people walking by with their Saturday evening plans, couples heading to dinner, friends meeting for drinks, individuals like me who were perfectly content with their own company. When had I stopped being content with my own company? When had I started needing constant validation from Christopher to feel like I had value? The train back to Philadelphia wasn't until 8 dusk, which gave me another hour in the city. I decided to walk through Washington Square Park, where street performers were entertaining small crowds and couples were sitting on benches watching the world go by. I took more pictures, getting braver with the camera settings, experimenting with different angles and lighting. As I walked, I thought about what came next. I'd have to go back to Philadelphia eventually, back to my apartment and my job and my life. But something fundamental had shifted today. I'd proven to myself that I could make a choice based purely on my own needs and values, even when that choice was difficult and painful. More importantly, I'd remembered who Linda Harrington was when she wasn't defined entirely by being Christopher's mother. She was someone who noticed beautiful light and interesting faces, someone who could navigate a new city on her own and make impulsive decisions about cameras and train tickets, someone who had opinions and preferences and dreams that had nothing to do with anyone else. As I headed back toward Penn Station, I realized I was looking forward to the train ride home, to the quiet time, to process everything that had happened today. I was looking forward to developing these photographs, to maybe signing up for that photography class Sarah had mentioned, to figuring out what other parts of myself I'd forgotten along the way. I was even, surprisingly, looking forward to Frank Sullivan's support group on Thursday. For the first time in years, I was curious about my own future. The return train was less crowded than the afternoon journey, and I found a quiet seat where I could watch the lights of small towns flash by in the darkness. My phone stayed off for the entire journey. Whatever messages were waiting for me could wait a little longer. I was no longer in a hurry to be needed. I didn't turn my phone back on until Sunday morning. When I finally did, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and morning light streaming through the windows, there were 23 missed calls and 47 text messages waiting for me. Most were from Christopher, but there were also messages from Michael, from Sarah, from 2 co-workers at the hospital, and even one from my sister Margaret in Seattle, which meant word had somehow traveled across the country. The progression of Christopher's messages told a story of its own, anger giving way to concern, concern becoming something that looked almost like panic. The final message, sent at 2:47 a.m., was just 4 words. "Mom, please call me." I set the phone aside and looked around my apartment, really looked at it. For the first time in years, everything in it was chosen for practicality or sentiment related to Christopher. The furniture was functional but uninspiring. The walls were covered with his school photos, his graduation pictures, his achievements. Even my bookshelf was mostly filled with parenting guides and self-help books about raising successful children. Where was Linda in this space? Where were the things that reflected my interests, my personality, my dreams? I picked up my new camera and took a photo of the apartment as it was, evidence of a life lived entirely in service to someone else. Then I made myself breakfast. Not the quick toast I usually grabbed between getting ready for work, but actual scrambled eggs with cheese, fresh fruit, and the good coffee I usually saved for when Christopher visited. As I ate, I thought about the past 24 hours and how different I felt from the woman who'd stood on those church steps yesterday morning. My phone rang. Christopher. This time, I answered. "Mom!" His voice was flooded with relief. "Thank God. Where have you been? I've been calling you since last night. I told you I went to New York. I needed some time to think." "You went to New York? By yourself? Mom, why would you do that?" The question struck me as revealing. Why would I go somewhere by myself? Why would I make a decision based purely on what I needed rather than what he needed? "Because I wanted to," I said simply. There was a long pause. "Mom, we need to talk. Can I come over?" "Where's Rachel?" She's at her parents' house. We had a fight last night after the reception." "About what?" Another pause. "About you. About what happened at the church. She thinks you were trying to ruin our wedding day. And I don't know what to think anymore." "What do you think, Christopher?" "I think I'm confused. I think yesterday was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and instead it turned into this whole drama that I don't understand." Drama. There was that word again. As if my refusal to accept humiliation was theatrical rather than a reasonable response to being treated poorly. "I'm going to make this simple for you," I said. "You can come over, but only if you're ready to have an honest conversation. Not if you're coming to lecture me or convince me I was wrong. And definitely not if Rachel is going to show up later to tell me how selfish I am. She's not coming. It's just me and Mom. I think I owe you an apology." Those words stopped me cold. Christopher hadn't apologized to me for anything in years, not since he was a teenager and had broken curfew or forgotten to do his chores. "All right," I said. "Come over. But Christopher, I'm not the same person I was yesterday morning. I need you to understand that." He arrived an hour later, still wearing his clothes from the night before, dress pants and a wrinkled button-down shirt, his tie hanging loose around his neck. He looked exhausted, and older somehow, like he'd aged years overnight. "You look terrible," I said as I let him in. "I didn't sleep, Mom. Can we sit down?" We settled on my couch, the same couch where I'd helped him with homework for years, where we'd watched movies together when he was in high school, where he'd told me about Rachel for the first time. But now, there was a distance between us that felt enormous. "I keep thinking about yesterday," he said, not looking at me. "About what happened at the church. And I think I've been telling myself it wasn't that big a deal, because it was easier than admitting I was wrong." I waited, not wanting to fill the silence, and let him off the hook. "The thing is, Rachel's family has all these traditions and expectations, and I got caught up in trying to fit into their world. Her parents were paying for most of the wedding, and they had very specific ideas about how things should go. And I went along with it because it seemed easier than fighting about it, even when it meant humiliating your mother. He flinched. I told myself it was just seeding, just logistics. I didn't think about how it would feel to you. No, you didn't think about me at all. That's not fair, Mom. I think about you all the time. Do you? When was the last time you asked me what I wanted? What I was interested in? What I needed? He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. I don't know. When was the last time you visited just to see me? Not because you needed something or wanted to tell me something. Another long silence. Christopher, I love you more than life itself. But somewhere along the way, our relationship became entirely one-sided. I gave and gave and gave, and you took it for granted. You assumed I would always be there, always be understanding, always put your needs first. But you're my mom. That's what moms do. No, I said firmly. That's what doormats do. Mothers love their children unconditionally, but that doesn't mean they have to accept being treated without respect or consideration. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. Needing some distance, he followed me. Mom, I'm sorry. I really am. I was wrong about the seating thing, and I was wrong not to stand up for you. Can we fix this? Can we go back to how things were? I don't want to go back to how things were. What do you mean? I picked up my camera from the counter, where I'd been looking at yesterday's photos. I went to New York yesterday and bought this camera. I walked around the city for hours taking pictures of whatever caught my eye. I ate dinner by myself in a cafe and enjoyed every minute of it. And for the first time in 26 years, I spent an entire day thinking about what I wanted instead of what you needed. He stared at the camera like it was some kind of alien artifact. You bought a camera. I used to love photography before you were born. I'd forgotten that about myself. I'd forgotten a lot of things about myself. Mom, you're scaring me a little bit. This doesn't sound like you. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe the person you think of as me was just the version of myself I created to be the perfect mother. Maybe it's time for you to meet the actual Linda Harrington. We stood there in my kitchen, looking at each other across a gulf that seemed to have opened overnight. This young man I'd raised, this person I'd centered my entire life around, suddenly seemed like a stranger. What does this mean for us? He asked quietly. I don't know yet, but I can tell you what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean I'm going to pretend yesterday didn't happen. It doesn't mean I'm going to go back to accepting whatever scraps of attention and respect you're willing to give me. And it definitely doesn't mean I'm going to smile and pretend to like Rachel when she's made it clear she sees me as an embarrassment. She doesn't see you as an embarrassment. Christopher, she seated me in the third row of your wedding and told me it was because I wasn't primary family. She smiled while she did it. If that's not seeing me as an embarrassment, I don't know what is. He was quiet for a long time, and I could see him thinking, maybe really thinking about what had happened for the first time. I need to talk to her, he said finally. That's between you and your wife. But Christopher, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life trying to win approval from someone who's already decided I'm not good enough. If Rachel can't treat me with basic respect, then she and I don't need to have a relationship. But she's my wife now, and I'm your mother. That should count for something. After Christopher left, I sat with my camera and scrolled through the photos I'd taken in New York. There was one in particular that caught my eye. A woman about my age sitting alone at a cafe, reading a book, looking completely content with her own company. I'd taken it without thinking, drawn to something in her expression that suggested deep satisfaction with her life. I wanted to be that woman. Over the next few weeks, I started making changes, small ones at first. I signed up for Frank Sullivan's support group, which turned out to be full of people rediscovering themselves after major life transitions. I enrolled in a digital photography class at the community college. I rearranged my apartment, taking down some of Christopher's childhood photos and replacing them with prints of my own photographs. Christopher called regularly, which was more than he'd done in months before the wedding. Our conversations were different now, more tentative, more careful. He was making an effort to ask about my life, my photography, my classes, but there was also a distance that hadn't been there before, an acknowledgement that something fundamental had shifted between us. Rachel never called or texted to apologize. According to Christopher, she maintained that I had overreacted, that the seating arrangement hadn't been personal, that I'd embarrassed myself by leaving. He was caught in the middle, trying to navigate between his new wife's expectations and his growing understanding of how he'd failed me. 3 months after the wedding, I was in Washington Square Park, the same place I'd walked the night I discovered photography again, when my phone rang. Christopher. "Mom, I have something to tell you," he said without preamble. "What is it?" "Rachel and I are getting a divorce." I stopped walking. "What?" "It's not working. We're too different. We want different things. And honestly, the way she talks about you, the way she talks about my family, it's been bothering me more and more." I found a bench and sat down, trying to process this news. "Christopher, I'm sorry. I know this must be difficult. The thing is, Mom, I don't think I'm really sorry. I think I'm relieved. I think I married her because she represented this life I thought I wanted, this world I thought I needed to be part of. But it never felt like me. What are you going to do?" "I'm moving back to Philadelphia. I took a job with a smaller company, less money but better work-life balance. And Mom, I was wondering, would you maybe want to have dinner sometime? Just us. I'd like to hear about your photography class, and I'd like to tell you about the person I'm trying to become." I looked around the park, at the people walking by living their authentic lives, at the autumn light filtering through the trees, the same light I was learning to capture with my camera. "I'd like that," I said. "But Christopher, I need you to understand that I'm not the same person I was before your wedding. I have my own life now, my own interests, my own plans. I'm not just sitting around waiting for you to need me. I know, and I think that's what I want to get to know. The real you, not just my mom." After we hung up, I sat on that bench for a long time, thinking about how much had changed since that September morning when I'd stood on the church steps in my navy blue dress. I'd lost the version of myself that existed solely to serve my son's needs, but I'd found something more valuable, my own identity, my own worth, my own voice. Would Christopher and I rebuild our relationship? Maybe. It would take time and effort from both of us, and it would have to be based on mutual respect, rather than my endless giving and his endless taking. But whether we did or not, I knew something now that I hadn't known before. I was worth more than how anyone else treated me, even my own child. I was Linda Harrington, not just Christopher's mother, but a whole person with dreams and talents and value that existed independent of anyone else's opinion. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. I picked up my camera and took a photo of the empty bench beside me, then one of my own hands holding the camera. Evidence of a woman who had learned to be her own companion, her own advocate, her own reason for taking up space in the world. For the first time in 26 years, I was exactly where I belonged. 2 years later, I was standing in a gallery in Center City, Philadelphia, watching people examine my photographs hanging on pristine white walls. The exhibition was called Second Chances, Women Rediscovering Themselves, and I was one of 12 photographers featured. My series, titled The Space Between, explored the quiet moments when people are alone with themselves, reading on park benches, walking empty streets, sitting in cafes with their thoughts. The photo that had started it all, the one I'd taken of myself holding my camera in Washington Square Park, was displayed prominently near the entrance, with a small placard that read, "Self-Portrait Draw 1, Linda Harrington, age 58, learning to see again." "Excuse me," said a voice behind me. I turned to see a young woman, probably in her early 30s, studying that particular photograph. "Are you Linda Harrington?" "I am. I just wanted to say thank you. My mother dragged me here tonight. She's going through a divorce and said she needed to see these photos. But honestly, I think I needed to see them more than she did." "How so?" The woman gestured toward the image. "I'm getting married next month, and I've been so focused on the wedding, on making everyone else happy, on fitting into my fiancé's family. I think I've forgotten who I am in all of it. This photo, this whole series, it's reminded me that I don't want to lose myself in marriage. I want to bring my whole self to it." Before I could respond, she'd moved on to the next photograph, leaving me with the strange satisfaction of knowing that my art, had spoken to someone in a meaningful way. Linda, I turned to see Sarah approaching, elegant in a black dress and carrying 2 glasses of wine. I can't believe this is really happening. You, in an actual gallery. I'm so proud I could burst. It still doesn't feel real, I admitted, accepting the wine gratefully. It should. You've worked incredibly hard for this. The photography classes, the community college courses, all those hours practicing. She gestured around the gallery. Look at this turnout. Half of Philadelphia is here. She wasn't exaggerating. The gallery was packed with people of all ages, and I'd been surprised by how many had specifically sought me out to talk about my work. Frank Sullivan had come with his wife, beaming like a proud father. My supervisor from the hospital had brought several colleagues. Even Margaret had flown in from Seattle for the opening. Linda? I turned at the familiar voice and felt my stomach tighten slightly. Christopher stood a few feet away, holding hands with a woman I didn't recognize. He looked good, healthier than he had in years, his face less stressed, his clothes more relaxed. The woman beside him was pretty in a natural way, with curly brown hair and laugh lines around her eyes. Christopher, I said, genuinely surprised. I didn't expect to see you here. I wouldn't miss this. He stepped closer, and I could see he was nervous. Mom, I'd like you to meet Emma. Emma, this is my mother, Linda. Emma stepped forward with a warm smile. Mrs. Harrington, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Christopher talks about you constantly, and these photographs are absolutely beautiful. Thank you, I said, studying her face for any hint of the practiced politeness I'd learned to recognize. But Emma's warmth seemed genuine, her eyes kind and intelligent. Emma's a social worker, Christopher said. She runs programs for at-risk youth downtown. That must be challenging work, I said. It is, but I love it. Actually, Christopher told me about your photography, and I was wondering— Emma paused, looking slightly embarrassed. Would you ever consider doing a workshop for some of our teenagers? We're always looking for creative outlets for them, and your work has such a powerful message about finding yourself. I looked at Christopher, surprised. You told her about my photography? Mom, I've been following your Instagram account for months. I've seen every photo you've posted from your classes, every project you've worked on. I'm really proud of what you've accomplished. For a moment, I was speechless. Christopher following my work, talking about me to his new girlfriend, showing pride in my achievements. This was not the son I'd known 2 years ago. I'd be interested in the workshop, I told Emma. Let me give you my card. My card. I still felt a thrill saying that. Linda Harrington, photographer. I'd had them printed just for tonight, never imagining I'd actually need them. As Emma and I exchanged contact information, Christopher hung back slightly, and I could see he wanted to say something private. Emma, would you mind if I borrowed my mom for just a minute? He asked. Of course. I'll go admire more of these incredible photos. When she was out of earshot, Christopher turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a child, vulnerable and hopeful. Mom, I know I don't deserve it, but I was wondering if maybe, would you like to have dinner sometime? Just the 3 of us. I'd really like you to get to know Emma better. What makes you think I'd want to do that? He smiled ruefully. Because Emma insisted. She said any man who could let his mother be treated the way I let Rachel treat you wasn't worth dating unless he was actively working to make it right. She made me tell her the whole story about the wedding, about everything that happened after. And then she told me I needed to earn my way back into your life, not just assume you'd forgive me because I'm your son. I looked across the gallery at Emma, who was genuinely engaged in conversation with another photographer about the technical aspects of a particularly challenging shot. She sounds like a smart woman. She is. And Mom, she's nothing like Rachel. She actually wants to know about my family, about where I came from. She keeps asking when she can meet you. I sipped my wine, considering. The old Linda would have immediately said yes, desperate for any sign that Christopher wanted her in his life. But the new Linda had learned to take her time with decisions, to consider what she actually wanted, rather than just reacting to what other people needed. I'm willing to have dinner, I said finally. But Christopher, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same mother I was before your wedding. I have my own life now, my own career, my own priorities. If you want a relationship with me, It has to be as equals, not as the grateful mother who's just happy for whatever attention you're willing to give. I understand, and honestly, I like this version of you better. You seem happier, more yourself. Before I could respond, Frank Sullivan appeared at my elbow, his face flushed with excitement. Linda, there's someone here you need to meet. She's from the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and she's interested in discussing a possible solo exhibition next year. My heart stopped. A solo exhibition? At the museum? She particularly loves your Women Alone series. Says it captures something essential about independence and solitude that she hasn't seen before. I looked at Christopher, who was grinning widely. Mom, that's incredible. I should probably go talk to her, I said, feeling dazed. Go, Christopher said. But before you do, I'm really proud of you, for all of this, but also for what you did that day at the church. It took courage to walk away, and I didn't appreciate that at the time. But I do now, as I walked across the gallery toward this museum curator who might change my life. I caught my reflection in a dark window. I was wearing a red dress I'd bought specifically for tonight. The first time in years I'd chosen red. The first time in years I'd dressed to stand out rather than blend in. My hair was shorter now, more stylish, and I was wearing the kind of confident smile I'd seen on other artists at gallery openings. I looked like a woman who belonged here, because I did. The conversation with the museum curator was a blur of exciting possibilities and potential timelines. She wanted to feature my work in a show about women's narratives, about stories of transformation and self-discovery. As we talked, I found myself describing my own journey, from the mother who'd lived entirely through her son's achievements to the artist who'd learned to see the world through her own eyes. Later that night, after the gallery had closed and the last visitor had left, I stood alone among my photographs, taking in the surreal reality of seeing my work displayed professionally. My phone buzzed with messages. Congratulations from friends, praise from strangers who'd seen posts about the exhibition on social media, even a text from Margaret saying she was so proud she'd cried in the hotel lobby. But the message that meant the most was from a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Harrington, this is Emma. Thank you for agreeing to dinner. Christopher has told me so much about your strength and independence. I can't wait to hear your stories. P.S. Your photographs are stunning. I typed back. Thank you, Emma. I look forward to getting to know you too. And please call me Linda. As I drove home through the Philadelphia night, I thought about that morning 2 years ago when I'd stood on the church steps, humiliated and heartbroken, feeling like my life was ending. I'd had no idea that it was actually beginning. The woman who'd walked away from that wedding had been brave, but she'd also been empty, defined entirely by what she wasn't, by what she'd lost. The woman driving through the city tonight was full of purpose, of passion, of relationships built on mutual respect rather than need. My apartment looked different now. Where Christopher's childhood photos had once dominated every surface, there were now prints of my own work, books about photography and art, plants I'd chosen because I liked them, not because they were practical. It felt like a home that belonged to Linda Harrington, not just to Christopher's mother. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the museum exhibition, about dinner with Christopher and Emma, about the workshop proposal for at-risk youth. My calendar was full of things I'd chosen, people I wanted to spend time with, projects that excited me. For the first time in my adult life, I was enough, not because someone else needed me or valued me or included me in their plans, but because I'd learned to value myself. I'd learned that love without respect wasn't really love at all, and that respect started with respecting yourself enough to walk away from situations that diminished you. Christopher might be back in my life now, and that felt good. But he was there because I'd chosen to let him back in, on my terms, as an equal. If he left again, if he disappointed me again, I would survive. I would thrive, because I'd learned the most important lesson of all. I was my own person, complete and valuable all by myself. Everything else, relationships, family, love, was extra, beautiful when it worked, but not essential for my happiness. I was 60 years old, and I was just getting started.